Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Leong, and it is January of 2026, which means that for many of us in legal academia, it is the time of year when we're starting to think about submitting an article for publication in a law review. I wanted to make this video to give an overview of the law review submission process, and given the time of year, I am putting a heavy emphasis on the logistical and strategic elements of the process. I think this video will be especially helpful for those of you who are submitting an article for the first time, including law students and those of you who are in practice right now, or maybe those of you who have only submitted an article a few times in the past, although I hope that there are going to be some new ideas here for veteran authors as well. A lot of the advice I'm going to share with you has been developed through my own trial and error. So I first submitted a law review article in the summer of 2005 while I was a second-year law student, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I made many mistakes. So in the 2 decades since then, I have navigated the law review submission process over 40 times with varying levels of success, and now I want to share with you some of what I've learned. I want to keep this video at a pretty high level, and I'm shooting for no more than half an hour. We'll see at the end how I did. But if you want more depth, this video closely tracks a written guide that I have created, which I have linked below this video. You can download it, and it goes into much more depth on everything that I'll be covering today. Just two quick notes before we get started. First, I'm going to focus on submissions to general interest law reviews, meaning student edited law reviews. And so if you're primarily interested in peer-reviewed journals, or if you're only interested in specialty journals, meaning journals that are focused on one subject matter area, this is probably not the video for you, or at least it's not the only resource you should be looking at. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is just kind of to acknowledge that part of my goal here today is to give you advice that will help you get a prominent placement. And by a prominent placement, I mean a placement in a journal that gets cited a lot and or a journal that is affiliated with a prominent institution, right? A prestigious institution. And this is just a recognition that in the world we live in, a more prominent placement is going to yield more citations for your article and more career benefits for you. Nothing more and nothing less. Probably this deserves its own video at some other time, but for this video today, we're just going to take that as a given. So with that, I have organized this video into 15 pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is write a good article. And I truly do not mean this to sound glib, but because this video is mostly focused on strategy and logistics, I do want to remind everybody that, strategy and logistics are like the last 2%, right? So even the best strategy can only help you so much if your article is not that good. At some future date, I want to write something and maybe do a video about the substantive aspects of scholarly legal writing. But given kind of where we are in the process, right, it's January, my strongest substance-related recommendation is to show your article to a lot of people for feedback and take what they say really seriously. In my view, this is probably the most important thing you can do to improve your work at this stage of the process. And if you are already in an academic position, I really recommend showing your article to a research assistant. Students can help you understand the student perspective before you submit your article for consideration by law review selection committees. So ask them what they think is interesting or confusing or even boring, and see what they say. I always do this before I send my article out, and I think it is one of the most helpful things that I do down the home stretch. Second piece of advice, pay attention to word count. Obviously, important scholarly contributions can come in many lengths, but most law reviews either explicitly or implicitly prefer articles that are in the 15,000 to 25,000 word range. An article that is less than 15,000 words can be viewed as too short to cover its topic in depth or maybe to make a significant contribution. And for space reasons, many journals have policies or at least norms against accepting articles that are more than 25,000 words long. Now, there are plenty of exceptions out there, articles that are longer, maybe sometimes articles that are shorter, but I really suggest that early career scholars who are shooting for the most prominent placement possible try to adhere to the length norm. And for whatever it's worth, every article that I have sent out for the last 10 years or so has gone out between 23,000 and 25,000 words. Number three, carefully consider the timing of your submission. While a small number of general interest journals will consider an article at almost any time of the year, the vast majority of journals review articles at two specific times during the year, roughly February and March, and then August and September. Because right now it's January, I want to focus on the February-March submissions period, which I'm going to call the winter cycle. And my bottom line is that I think most people will maximize their likelihood of achieving a prominent placement by submitting their articles to law reviews on or even a few days before February 1st. So consider the following chart, which was shared with me by a general interest law review, which shows how many articles the law review received on each date throughout the winter-spring cycle. So as you can see, this particular law review began accepting submissions on January 31st, and you'll notice that there's a large spike in submissions around February 1st, and that submissions then taper off significantly. So you want to submit on or maybe even a few days before February 1st if you can, so that your article doesn't get stuck in a long queue behind all of the articles that were submitted in the February 1st rush. And in particular, if you get your article in pretty early in the cycle, you're not running the risk that your subject area will be preempted when the journal accepts an earlier submission in the same subject area. Now, obviously, I don't mean to imply that you can't get a good placement for your article if, for some combination of reasons, you end up submitting later in the winter-spring cycle. As you can see here, plenty of people are still submitting even into March. But my goal is to recommend kind of the ideal timing, the timing that I think will give you the highest probability of a prominent placement when you're relatively new to law review publishing. And then, you can modify as needed for your own schedule. And for those of you who are interested in this topic, there is a really long section about timing in the written guide that I have linked below the video. Fourth piece of advice, take 15 minutes and get familiar with Scholastica. So Scholastica is the platform that most journals use to review articles. And I recommend that you set up your Scholastica account well in advance of the date that you're going to try to submit. You don't want to be kind of fumbling around with the platform like as you're trying to get your article out the door. And if you've never submitted an article, I recommend that I really think you can do it in 10 or 15 minutes. The platform is reasonably user-friendly. And just familiarize yourself with the different features and where everything is so that, again, this is not something that's occupying your attention on, the last day when you're trying to get the article uploaded and out the door. Number 5, format your article appropriately. The bottom line is that you want to send your law review article out looking like a law review. And below the video, I'm linking a Word template courtesy of Eugene Volokh that you may find helpful. Sometimes people are like, why does this matter? Why can't I send it out like, in Courier font or double spaced or something like that? And all I really have to say here is that this is not the time to assert your individuality. So you want your law review article to look like a law review article. And if you choose to use a different format, you may stand out as someone who doesn't know what they're doing, which may make you look like an amateur, or as someone who doesn't care about conventions, which can make you seem like you might be difficult to work with. So take the extra time and make sure to format it like a typical law review article. Number 6, pick a great title. So in general, the most important thing is that the title match the article. Obviously, you want a title that gives the reader a sense of what the article is about. And in general, shorter titles suggest that an article is somewhat broader in scope. So compare these two titles. So we have Misdemeanors by Alexandra Nadapoff. And then we have a much longer title that I'm not going to take the time to read, which is a student note by Lily Fu. So after you read these titles, probably you're anticipating that the first article is a pretty comprehensive study of, the way that misdemeanor offenses function in the criminal legal system, while the second title is of an article, or in this case, a student note that tackles a more specific problem. So titles create expectations, and it's very important that the title match the article. So if your article is narrower than its title, the editor reading your article may feel that important material has been left out. By contrast, if your article is broader than the title, then the editor may wonder why you are including things that are beyond the scope of the project. So I really cannot overstate the importance of the title in creating expectations. And this is another thing that I recommend you brainstorm about with other people. Both lawyers and non-lawyers can also be really helpful in brainstorming titles. And I often have an email thread going with a few colleagues where we workshop each other's titles. Some people are just really good at this, and so I think having kind of a focus group on your title is only a good thing. Number seven, and this is a big one. So invest in your abstract table of contents, introduction, and cover letter. So I think of these as the key components of any law review submission. Each of these components serves a different purpose, and I discuss them in immense detail with examples from my own work in the guide that I've written. For purposes of this video, not being 3 hours long, I'm going to limit myself to just a few pieces of general advice about each of these. So in terms of the abstract and the introduction, I want to talk about these together because they overlap in content, but they differ from one another in important ways. So your article should begin with the abstract. That is, the abstract goes right below the title in the main article document. Think of the abstract as a statement and high-level explanation of the argument that your article is making and the contribution to the field. By contrast, the introduction is more detailed and specific than the abstract. So what you're doing there is giving, of course, a statement of the argument that you're making, but also the background that the reader needs in order to understand the importance of the argument. And you're also outlining the steps of the argument. At the end of my guide, there's an appendix with a red line in which I explain the thinking behind the abstract and introduction to one of my articles. So if this is something that you're struggling with a little bit, that might potentially be helpful to you. In terms of the table of contents, think of the table of contents as a roadmap for a reader who doesn't know very much about your subject area. So when someone looks at the table of contents before they begin their journey through your article, the table of contents should give them a guide to what will be happening in the coming pages. And I always like to imagine the reader kind of flipping back and forth between the body of the article and the table of contents to make sure that they're tracking where the article is going and how the argument is proceeding. One thing I really recommend, and my faculty would tell you that I've been on kind of a tear about this lately, but one thing I really recommend is to keep your headings pretty short. You don't want argumentative sentences the way that you might in a brief. And a good rule of thumb, I think, is that you want the headings to stay on one line and they should be short descriptors, again, not full sentences. So here is an example of a table of contents that is not doing as much for the article as it could. Now, to be clear, this article has an important contribution to make, and it's on a really important topic. But these headings and subheadings, as you can see, are rather long and meandering. And as a result, they fail to give the reader a useful overview or roadmap of the argument. So I think that tightening these up would really help the reader understand where all of this is going. And I also think that improving on these headings is pretty easy. So for example, if you look at heading 3A, which currently says universities collect minimal data concerning the racial impact of their discipline systems and they keep what they collect secret, that is a mouthful, but I think it can be nicely summarized as lack of data. I would probably just call that section lack of data. 3B, implicit bias infects the perceptions of victims, other witnesses, investigators and hearing examiners and other fact finders. I might just call this implicit bias and then do the rest of the unpacking in this section. I have, again, a lot more about tables of contents in my guide, but I'll stop here for purposes of this video not being overly long. But I do think that tables of contents tend to get neglected in law review submissions. They're often just kind of thrown in at the end. And so I really recommend spending some time with yours and, thinking about it from the perspective of an editor. Finally, just a few quick words about cover letters. This is another opportunity to interest student editors in your work. And I think of this as a sales pitch. This is a good place to mention current events, even very current events, like something in the news today. So current events that bear upon the article and that make its contribution particularly timely and relevant, or to highlight your own relative interest and expertise, especially if, you can speak to the topic in a way that very few people can. Again, if you want a few examples in my guide, I have 4 different cover letters from my own articles that I have submitted in the last 5 years. Number 8, update your CV. Most law reviews ask you to submit your CV along with your other materials. For purposes of the law review submission process, the CV should highlight your scholarly publications and keyword relevant professional experience. If you have other previous publications, make sure they're prominently listed with their own heading and not buried under some other heading. Number 9, gather your materials in advance. Again, the Scholastica platform is reasonably user-friendly, but even so, I strongly recommend that you gather all of your materials in one place and have them all saved in a single folder that you are only using for this submission. This will reduce the likelihood of user error, like uploading the wrong version of the file. And here I want to note, and I learned this sadly from personal experience, that if you do upload the wrong file, there is no way to edit a Scholastica submission. Like it has gone to law reviews. The only thing you can do is to withdraw and try again. And here it becomes relevant that there are also no refunds. So make sure that you organize your documents properly because you won't be able to make any changes once you've submitted everything to the law reviews. Number 10, target journals strategically. Again, this is a huge topic, but let me just offer a few kind of overarching thoughts. There is no inherently correct number of journals to submit your article to. As a general rule, I don't think you ever need to submit to more than 150 journals to get an offer of publication, even if this is your first article ever. I suggest a mix of general interest journals and some specialty journals that are also focused on your article's subject area. So for instance, if one of my untenured colleagues or even one of my students had an article about a Fourth Amendment issue, I would suggest that they submit to a maximum of 125 general interest journals and maybe 25 specialty journals that focus on topics related to criminal law, criminal procedure, constitutional law, and maybe law and public policy. To choose journals, I recommend that you use the Law Review meta rankings, and I've not highlighted, I have provided a link below this video to a set of meta rankings that take into account several different ranking systems. And then also for specialty journals, I think that the Washington and Lee citation rankings, which I've also linked below this video, are helpful. So spend a little time tooling around and kind of getting familiar with those. If you are still a student, please note that many prominent law reviews do not publish work by students. And so when I say to submit to no more than 150 journals, make sure that it's 150 journals that are actually open and that actually accept student work. And Nancy Levitt and her colleagues have put together a really helpful guide to journals that publish student work, which is current as of 2021 and which I will also link below the video. Step number 11, be patient. And this is the hardest piece of advice in some ways, but it is very important. Regardless of when you submit your article, it can take a while before offers of publication start coming in. During the winter spring 2025 cycle, I spoke with a few colleagues who waited over a month for their first offer, but then ended up with like a top 50 placement. What I do not recommend is that you submit to an additional wave of like less desirable to you journals while you're waiting. Just wait, just be patient, and that first acceptance will it'll come at some point and it'll get everything rolling. Number 12, receive and offer and expedite strategically. Okay, so once you have an offer, it is standard practice to expedite, meaning let journals that you view as more desirable for whatever reason know about the offer that you have already received. Strategically speaking, you will want to secure as much time as possible to expedite to other journals. And the journal that first gave you an offer will give you a deadline to respond to their offer. Deadlines can vary pretty widely, but it's reasonable, I think, to expect most journals to give you a week. Not all journals will be willing to do this, which is fine. That's their prerogative. But I think it's fine as well for you to ask if you can have a week. And if you can't get a full week, see if maybe it will work for the journal to give you just a weekend, because there are a lot of journals that review over the weekend. And so if you can get an extra weekend, then maybe that'll allow a few extra journals to have a look at your work. In deciding where to expedite, I recommend the same resources that I recommend for deciding where to submit in the first place. The meta rankings, which incorporate the US News rankings and various citation rankings, and also the Washington and Lee rankings, which are particularly helpful for specialty journals. For the actual act of expediting, meaning letting other journals know about the offer you've received and telling them about your time frame that you need to make a decision, I recommend using the tool in Scholastica that allows you to send the expedite request to a group of journals all at once. And you can use this tool to communicate both the name of the journal that has extended the offer of publication to you and the time that you need to get back to that journal to let them know. In other words, your deadline. Make sure that you include the right time zone when you let the journal know about when your deadline is. This is also a mistake that I have made in the past. The final thing I want to say about offers, once you have an offer, you should withdraw ASAP from, any journal where your article is still in play, whose offer you would not accept over the offer you've already received. So withdraw everywhere from all the journals who are no longer in contention for you. And this might seem like a low priority, but it's actually a very, very important priority. If you don't withdraw, you're going to end up wasting a lot of editors' time as they review your article. You're also just holding up the process in general, and that might be holding up a colleague, it might be holding up a friend. Withdrawing is the collegial thing to do. Number 13, negotiate your offer. So some of the terms of an offer may be negotiable. People don't always know this. One, I especially encourage junior faculty or junior scholars to think about is that if you have any preferences about the editing schedule for your article or the timing of its publication, now is the time to talk about those with the editors. And just, one example might be if the Supreme Court is soon going to decide a case that bears on your article, maybe you want to make sure that your article doesn't come out until after that case is decided so that you can talk about it in your article. Once you've decided where you want to publish your article, accept your offer and decline other offers graciously. So first of all, congratulations, you have an offer and you're going to accept that offer. So once you've decided which offer to accept, I always just like to write the editors a nice email thanking them for all the time they spent reviewing my work and telling them that you are excited to work with them. I think that getting off on the right foot before you go through several rounds of editing with the editors, that's always a good thing, just to have a good foundation for a relationship there. You should also decline your other offers in a timely way. And again, I want to emphasize that it's really poor form not to respond to a journal that's extended you an offer. It's also inconvenient for the journal and it holds up their review of other pieces. So don't put a journal in this position. It's not a good practice. Make sure that you respond to every journal that has extended you an offer. Then my final piece of advice, once you've signed your publication contract and you're committed to publishing with a particular journal, promote your research. So once your article is accepted, you do not have to wait for it to be published to get your research out into the world. And I recommend that you post your article to the Social Science Research Network, as well as Digital Commons. These are databases that are used to make both pre and post publication research available to other legal scholars, scholars in other disciplines, practitioners, journals, policymakers, students, the general public, everyone. I find both of these databases reasonably self-explanatory, and they are a good way of getting your work out into the world. All right, so I hope that this video has been helpful to you in submitting your law review article. Again, if you're interested in a deeper dive on any of the topics that I've covered today, you can take a look at my guide, which is linked below this video. A few things you might be interested in. The guide has a red line of the abstract and introduction of an article that I published recently where I break down exactly what I'm trying to communicate and why. And it also includes 4 examples of actual cover letters that I submitted along with my articles in the past 5 years or so. So if you like, you can compare the cover letter to the article and think about what is being accomplished strategically there. All right, so that's about it. If you have any feedback for me, or if you would like to share your experience submitting an article, or if you are a law review editor with thoughts about the process, please feel free to get in touch with me. My email address is below the video, and I will do my best to respond to all emails, although it may take me a little while. So thank you again for watching this video, and good luck with the article submissions process.